Hello and welcome to Politics Today, home edition. Due to the COVID-19 restrictions, our studio in London is closed. I'm having to do this program from home, but rest assured I have two very good guests with me. They are Robin Benson, who is a Christian commentator, together with Michael McCann. He is the director of Israel-Britain Alliance and a former Labour MP. I'll start off with you, Michael. It's the first programme that we've all done together in the new year, so I want to wish you all both actually a happy new year. Michael, what's the situation in Scotland regarding COVID-19? Because as of the end of December, the British Isles went into what can only be described as horror movie 3, that is lockdown 3. And this feels very much like another Hollywood horror movie as we go into deeply into another lockdown.
Well, first of all, Simon, Happy New Year to you, and blessings to you and to Robin and to all Revelation TV viewers. I hope they have a very successful and peaceful and hopefully in the not too distant future COVID-free 2021. Up here in Scotland, as you mentioned earlier, you've got a photograph of a picture of my landscape outside my house, right above your head there. But the conditions here are the same as everywhere else in the UK. I mean, we're in virtual lockdown. Everybody's been told to stay indoors because of this new virulent mutation of COVID-19, which means that people are far more susceptible to it, and and because of that, the susceptibility and the passing rate is so high. Then more people are likely to get this terrible, terrible disease. And I think I've been watching the news, and I've just been actually watching some testimony from people who are in hospital and who are thankfully now recovering. And the stories they're telling, I was watching a young man on the TV who, holding back the tears, saying how difficult it was to take a breath. And the last thought, as he was dipping in and out of consciousness, would the fact that he wouldn't be able to see his family, and the phone was getting held up to his ear. He didn't even have the energy to tell his father, who, like most fathers, tend to withhold the tears, but his father was upset down the phone, and this young man was saying that he didn't even have the strength to muster I love you, thinking that he was in his last moment. So anyone who had any context in their head that this was a hoax or it was being exaggerated by government or government officials or whoever, hopefully that expels such views.
And Robin, we're certainly seeing that the situation with COVID-19 is infection rates are definitely increasing. In London and in the southeast, we're seeing rates go through the roof, with news reports saying that hospitals face the worst crisis in living memory, and that the situation could overwhelm our hospitals within 2 weeks. What's the situation for you, like in the southeast?
Yeah, the south coast. I mean, East Sussex, was one of the areas that declared an emergency because the hospitals here are overwhelmed with the number of cases coming in. The Brighton hospital is struggling to cope with the influx of, as Michael has pointed out, these folk who are catching this really virulent strain, and sadly it's passing around so fast. I mean, I got one of these apps that traces, your locality. So they lumped me into the Lewis district sort of council area. And about 2 days ago, there were estimated over 1,800 cases. And that had skyrocketed in a matter of 2 weeks from around 400, estimated cases. It's dropped down to just under 1,400 as of today. But, you watch the graph and it's just gradually up and up and up and up and up and up day by day. So, yeah, I mean, I struggle to fully grasp anybody who thinks that this is not a catastrophic, infection rate, and it's having catastrophic effects on our health system. And I'm sure, like, you and Michael, you watch some of the news broadcasts. I was so moved by that report a couple of days ago from the guy, the BBC's health correspondent who went into a London hospital, and these nurses and doctors literally in tears because they're so frustrated and hurting that they can't help people overcome this disease. And, I've got a friend, locally who is involved in chaplaincy work. I was chatting with him one day last week. He had been by the bedside in one afternoon of 3 people who passed away. I mean, the effect that this is having on our medical frontline staff is going to have a ripple effect in their lives for months, if not years to come, what they have had to contend with, as well as the people who are actually trying to, fight off this disease and recover from it. It's just beyond belief.
And Michael, our own Howard Conda, the founder of Revelation TV, sadly had to go into hospital last week in Spain, but is making a recovery. And it just really shows you that those who take the narrative, and I've had to refuse a couple of guests on this program because they thought that COVID-19 was a fake back in March, that these lockdowns are not real, and that this virus wasn't true. I think as broadcasters, we have to have a kind of moral responsibility to our viewers to say, look, this is real. We know people that have had it. I know people have had it. I think everyone now can say that they know people that have actually that have caught COVID-19, and it's a deadly infection. But depending on your health and your age, it depends on how risky that category is. So isn't it important that we have to be vigilant regarding this pandemic?
Of course it is. And I think this all traces back to this whole concept of fake news. Now, you can watch the news, and I often watch the news in terms of the business I'm involved in terms of being a pro-Israel, leading a pro-Israel advocacy organisation, and I see the news and how it's reported about Israel, and it's quite frankly scandalous, and particularly from organisations like the BBC. The only thing that frustrates me about the broadcast about COVID is how they lurch from one extreme to the other. Are there enough restrictions in place? Are there too many restrictions in place? So in order to keep this 24/7 news cycle going, they lurch from one extreme to the other. And incidentally, I think to an extent that can feed into this concept of, are we being told the truth? Is this fake? Is it real? But what people have to realise is that now that I know from good friends and from family members, people and my wife's cousins who are down in the South End, one of whom is recovering from replacement lung transplant, who have caught COVID because of their son, and not that it's their son's fault, he was the unfortunate transmitter, but when in the circumstances where you now know people and you worry about them and fear for them because either that they have underlying health issues or they're older, then this idea that people can peddle that this is somehow fake news is just utterly extraordinary to me. I think it'll behove some of our politicians, particularly in Scotland, who are using this, and I make no apologies for saying this, who are using this as a platform, as a foundation for their own political ambitions or their constitutional ambitions for Scotland to become an independent nation. I mean, I abhor that. I think they should just stick to the ones. And when you get politicians who refuse to say that independence, for example, should be ruled out, particularly when we're involved in this pandemic, I think that is abhorrent and it's revolting to me in terms of misuse of politics. But let's not get away from the fact, whether you're in Scotland, England, Northern Ireland or Wales, or in any part of the globe, the bottom line is this is the biggest threat to mankind that we've ever faced.
And Robin, looking at the statistics, they're saying now that 1 in 30 Londoners has caught COVID-19, which is an alarming high rate. Even the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, believes it's something like 1 in 20. So we see that our major cities, particularly London, is overrun with this crisis. But do you think in the way that the government responded to this first crisis back in March, they were very slow to respond, very slow to shut down, but it seems that now with this mutant strain of the virus that we really are facing the real virus, unlike what we experienced back in March. Would you say that was fair to say, or do you think the government has been kind of vigilant all the way along regarding COVID-19?
I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that question, Simon. I think the government have, to some extent, they have done they've done their best to handle a constantly changing and evolving crisis. Some aspects of it they've handled reasonably well. Other aspects of it, they seem like they've dragged their heels, or they've been afraid to, as often, they're accused, they've been afraid of actually imposing stricter restrictions because of either economic or other backlash from it, and therefore we're in the situation that we're in. I mean, would any one of the three of us want to be in government at the present time? I doubt it, because of the pressure that these men and women must be under is just tremendous. They're, in some senses, they're in a no-win situation. Whatever they do, this virus seems to be able to circumvent and then reappear, and go down a different route, and throw them, and then they have to react. So they're constantly reacting rather than trying to be proactive. But I'm not sure that you can be proactive. As you say, the virus has mutated at least once. It looks like there's a second one in South Africa. There are probably other mutations in other parts of the world that haven't actually traveled because there isn't much travel from that particular area. This is the nature of viruses. I'm not a virologist, but I read the material from those who are. This is what viruses do. They change. And so we're in a situation where it seems like the government is always going to be on the wrong foot, but I don't know how they can deal with any differently than seek to respond as best they can, as quickly as they can, even though we may think they're dragging their heels.
Can I mention one point in that, Simon, which I think is useful from a Scottish perspective? The thing is that the UK government has got to deal with all the health consequences of this issue, as well as the economic consequences.
Yeah.
And I think I said in a previous show, I think very few people understand the economics of where we're borrowing money from. Where does a country borrow money from? We're borrowing it against our background and our tried and tested formula as a democratic nation, which gives us a AAA rating in terms of the world market. So we're borrowing against our own standing, as it were. So ultimately, when people buy government bonds, where we borrow the money, and then ultimately people will get that money repaid to them in the government bonds and interest. It's a no-lose bet if you're taking on a bond, because you're going to get that money back. Bottom line is, it means that if you've got 100 billion quid to spend every year, but you have to pay 10 billion back to the people that have lent you money, who have bought those government bonds, then you've only got 90 billion to spend. And so the money has to be repaid back. So Rishi Sunak's got to think all those consequences. And this is where it gets me, where people are using this COVID-19 for political purposes. Up in Scotland, and to a certain extent Wales and Northern Ireland, they don't need to worry about the economic consequences. That's why Nicola Sturgeon has attempted to undermine the UK government after they had the discussions amongst the four nations. She's made announcements ahead of everyone else, and people have said, oh, look at that, how great is she? But she's doing it because she doesn't need to worry about the economic circumstances, because she's getting the money from the UK government. They're the ones that are they're the ones that are having to borrow and find the money to keep this country going along and keep people in furlough and try to protect jobs. So I think people should be aware of that dynamic. And when they watch the news and they hear people speaking, they should understand that there are other agendas at work. This is not about fake news about COVID, but there are always political agendas at work.
Back to you, Michael. Your beloved football team, Celtic, has been in the news, where Nicola Sturgeon has attacked the club for flying out to Dubai, and then one of the players caught COVID, which has put virtually the rest of the team in isolation. There are those exploiting the government rules, particularly celebrities flying off to Dubai, and I think the government has actually announced now that they put Dubai on the travel ban list to prevent celebs going out there for a few weeks and having a holiday. How does the government expect everyone else to follow the rules if so-called celebrities and football players and those that are in the public eye don't follow those rules?
Well, quite frankly, you do mention my team. I'd rather you hadn't, but ultimately, whoever makes the decisions on these matters at a football club such as Celtic really deserves to face all the criticism that's coming their way, because we know the decision in this particular circumstance was made at the start of November, before the new mutation was identified. And the time the mutation was identified, they could have called it off at any time. They could have said, look, we're not going to go. And it's not only created a very bad feeling about an us and them situation between ordinary people and those who are considered elite athletes, but in fact, they've shot themselves completely in the foot, because they played last night and they had to put out a team of players. And as I mentioned before the show started, I didn't even know some of the names. I mean, they were so obscure, some of these players, that they didn't even have any numbers on the team sheet. so depleted was the squad as a result of the self-isolation. So I think there's a responsibility. Elite football has been allowed to continue, although there are some leagues now that are being effectually put on ice. The main leagues are still operating, and they should realise that they are being given. They're very, very lucky to be able to continue to work, because that's what it is. Continue to work in the circumstances we're in. Yes, they're providing entertainment, but they have to take all those things on board that the rest of us have to take on board, and they have to look after their health in the same way, and the health of others around them. And I sometimes think that when it comes to some professions, that they're not taking the responsibilities that they have seriously, and there is no better exemplification of that than the way that the Celtic Football Club handled their business over the last number of days. And foolishly, they compounded their error by putting on one of their coaching staff, who then attempted to make suggestions or placate the interviewer by suggesting that some of these things could have happened anyway if they'd remained in Scotland, which is, when you're watching it, it's like a television car crash taking place live right in front of your very eyes. The Celtic chief executive doesn't live too far away from me. If I had the opportunity to chap his door, which I won't do because I'm social isolating, I would be telling him you've made a very, very, very rash error of judgment.
Still got a result though. It was still 1-1 despite a pleated team. So you only lost 2 points.
We don't consider that a result. The only thing we consider a result is 3 points.
And it's just as well you're not into football, Robin. Otherwise, I think this programme could go in a different direction.
Yes.
So staying off the issue of football. Do you think that people are really facing lockdown fatigue? Latest news to come out now is that the chief inspector of the Metropolitan Police Force has come out and said that she will send her police officers if supermarkets need assistance in forcing people to wear masks. So we had a very high profile case of 2 young girls driving 5 miles to go for a walk and have exercise. We're now talking about Matt Hancock saying that everyone has to wear masks if they go out in public. And that they can only do possibly one weekly shop, 1 hour of exercise a day, and the rest of the time stay at home. Do you think that sometimes that people are now thinking enough's enough, that there is only so much of this we can endure, and we've actually endured this for 6 months out of 9 months? That is being locked down, confined to our home.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, it's human nature to chafe against restrictions, whatever the restrictions are. So there are some people who are going to go along with it because they recognize the inherent dangers of, breaking the rules, going against the restrictions. But there are other people, bless them, they're just fed up to the back teeth with it, or they're actually they're so mentally, emotionally frazzled that they'll do anything to get a bit of fresh air, to get out, to do some shopping and all the rest of it. I had an email from a major supermarket, today, saying, be prepared when you next go to the local store. There may be a security guard outside the door saying you can't come in unless you wear a mask, restricting the number of people who can come in at one time. It's okay when that happens in the spring and the summer and the autumn. But on a day like today, where you could get well and truly soaked waiting outside the supermarket, waiting to get in to buy necessities, people are going to really struggle with that. And I know it has to happen, but I don't think sometimes the politicians who make these decisions really sit down and think through what are the practical implications of this. For someone who needs something, has to wait in a queue outside in the rain for half an hour to an hour to get into a store. I mean, what else can they do? But it's just, it's a bad time of the year to start making more and more restrictions. And some people are just going to say, we're going to totally ignore this and do our own thing, whatever it costs us. But part of the problem is that there are those who should know better. And obviously, you and Michael have highlighted one particular instance, but there are even politicians who should know better and who are breaking the restrictions that the government have set in place. And again, the media is not slow to highlight that. And all it does is undermine people's trust. And they think, well, if they think they can get away with it, maybe I can too. So I'm going to do it as well. It doesn't help when those who set themselves up as examples, rightly or wrongly, set themselves up as examples, break the law and get away with it.
Michael, Boris Johnson himself, our Prime Minister, has come into trouble on the local London news because he cycled on Sunday 7 miles to East London. Now, a lot of these issues are surely absolutely ridiculous, that no one can keep the entirety of all these laws and COVID laws and recommendations that the government put in place. And half of ministers don't even know what they are anyway when they're questioned. So how do they expect the public to follow their leading when they're not following themselves, or they don't even know what they are?
Well, something, I think this is all pretty simple, and those that we've had ridiculous situations. We've talked about the footballers and all the rest of it. We had the SNP MP, now sitting as an independent, who went to London thinking that she might have had symptoms, discovered that she was COVID positive, then got back on a train and went back to Scotland, interacting with God knows so many people. And then the law didn't prosecute her because, it wasn't strong enough to do so. Apparently, the Scottish legal system has come up with a way that they can potentially prosecute her, but Nicola Sturgeon threw her under a bus and said she must resign. She refused to resign because she's an 85 grand a year job and probably wouldn't get a quarter of that if she was doing an ordinary job based on her skills and her talent. And therefore you're in a situation where people are looking in, and as Robin says, for all those reasons, think, well, I can get away with a little bit of it. But look, it's dead simple. If you go on a bike ride, and I see people out on bikes all the time, and let me assure you, they're not going out. These people who are, going out for a cycle, and if they're trying to keep fit or whatever, they're not going out for a 2-mile cycle. They're going out for like 10 miles, 20 miles or whatever on a bike and coming back in. So if you're on a bike, there's air flowing past you. There's less likelihood of you coming into contact with anybody else and all that sort of stuff. And it's your one piece of exercise per day. The real problem is when we're going to supermarkets. And the reason that Morrison's and Tesco's and Sainsbury's and John Lewis have now said you can't get into our shops without a mask unless you've got a medical reason for not doing so is because people were going, stuff you, I'm not wearing a mask. Now, that is utter ignorance, and it's putting other people in jeopardy because they could be carrying the disease. They don't know they've got it, and they could be picking up an apple or a piece of fruit. They can be picking up a packet, putting it back on the shelf, say, I don't want that. And as the adverts show, when you've got this sort of green glow around something that's been contaminated, the next shopper goes in, picks it up, and then lo and behold, they're a vulnerable person, or they've got an illness, and you have effectively, and let's not beat about the bush, you could effectively lead to a conclusion that person doesn't make it through this pandemic. So that's, I don't think the rules are complicated. I think it is. I've got neighbours in the building I live in, and when I'm standing talking to them, I keep my distance from them. The only person I'm in contact with is my wife, and we're both in the same place. So that's the situation. And quite frankly, anyone trying to overcomplicate it is kidding themselves on. If we abide by the rules, then we can get through this, and hopefully our sanity will be intact, because I think that's a real danger in terms of our mental health being compromised. But if we abide by the rules, we can get through this in the best way we possibly can.
And Robin, we're down to 3 minutes 30 left of the program, which has gone really fast. But what should our Christian response be to following the government guidelines when there is so many kind of conspiracies out there regarding COVID-19? And we know from personal experiences that this is real and that we have to be alert. But how should we respond to the government guidelines?
I think we're called as believers to be good citizens. So good citizens means that we are responsible, A, for ourselves, and B, for those around us. And therefore, as Michael has already pointed out in that previous answer, we are supposed to live responsibly and not just think of ourselves, but think of those around us, and take responsibility for our actions and for our behavior, and do what's required of us. I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult, and some people really struggle with it. And there are the emotional and psychological issues that, compound it for certain people because of their personalities. But that's what we're called to be, good citizens, and that's what we should be.
And Michael, what advice do you have for our viewers as a former member of Parliament about how we should kind of take seriously the government's guidelines regarding the procedures in order to actually confront and limit the spread of COVID-19?
Well, I'll go back to some of the words that Robin mentioned earlier, that he wouldn't envy any politician in this situation. And I don't, because I know what their mailbags will be like. And if you think it's bad, and with the thoughts that you have about disagreeing with someone, let me assure you, there's some people in our nation who will be sending the most horrible communications to politicians. They'll be saying things to them that would make your skin crawl. And having been in that situation and on different issues, I know how tough it is. And this one, normally issues are about 49% agreeing with you, 51% disagreeing with you. It's much more nuanced than that. It could be 20%, 19%, 17%, 16%, 22%. Everybody will have a different opinion on this, and you cannot please everybody all the time. My advice to everybody is make your political judgments after this is over in terms of how they've handled it. And I would say one thing, and leaving it on a positive note, because Robin was saying that they've done some things right, other things badly. They've done one thing very, very right, and that is we now have access to 3 vaccines, and we've vaccinated more people than Europe has vaccinated in total. And we should be thankful now that the army involved, because I see that as being I get real confidence from that, because these people know the logistics of these big ticket issues and how to deliver them. And I think we should have some hope that by mid-February, if the vulnerable and the older people in the communities are vaccinated, then we can see a path to normality and getting back to normal. And in the meantime, for everybody in Revelation TV and all the viewers, is keep safe and keep well and follow the rules.
Michael, Robin, thank you so much for being my guests on Politics Today Home Edition. And I want to thank you all for watching this program today. I mean, we have to take seriously certainly the threat that this virus poses, particularly the elderly and the vulnerable, who are most vulnerable to this coronavirus. So let's all just take the necessary precautions. Let's continue to lift up our government in prayer. And as Robin rightly said, let's continue to be good citizens of this nation. So I want to thank you for watching this home edition of Politics Today.